Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Finance and Corporate Services Committee. We have 5 items on the agenda. We will begin with the consent items. Could I get a mover? Moved by Councillor Galloway-Seelock, Councillor Gazzola. Having the queue.
I have a question on number 1.
Question on number 1. So motion to take number 1 out of consent. Those in favor? That carries. Very good. Councillor Gazzola.
I'm just curious what we're approving there, because when we dealt with this issue, we left it that the mayor and clerk sign off on all these things. So what are we doing by this resolution?
Mr. Wilmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's really the reason for the underlying in the first paragraph of the report. So what's already been approved is entering into agreements to deliver the program. What's before you today is entering into recipient grant agreements. There's 2 different types of agreement. And on the first one, I think there's 1 master agreement. On the second one, there's many agreements.
But I'm still not clear on what are we approving. It's who's going to sign off on them.
That's correct.
And right now, the way it was said, it was the mayor and the clerk. So we're going to change it to somebody else than the clerk.
We're going to change it to the manager of the Small Business Center together with the executive director of economic development. So it's still 2 parties. It's just that it doesn't have to be the mayor and clerk.
It doesn't go as high as it used to.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the idea is that this will happen more quickly, and the recipient of the grant would have access to the grant more quickly.
I know democracy sometimes takes time. So okay. Thank you.
Ms. Farrell, do you have anything to add? Or? Good. Yeah, okay, good. Okay, so on that item, those in favor? And opposed? None opposed? Very good. Okay, we'll move on to the discussion items. The first is the participatory budgeting follow-up, and the delegation for this is Mr. Sean Goby from UW. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. It's exciting to actually be able to speak with all of you in person. Last time in February when my team spoke with you, it was my colleague Sean Campbell and Norman Kearney who were here speaking for us and in part on my behalf, although at that point my first son was 10 days old, so it was a little hard for me to make it out. As much as I respect and appreciate the space that you've all made for us, he was a little more demanding that day, just the way of these things. So thank you for having us in again. And really thanks for all the feedback that you provided to our group in February, which we have taken into account, thought through very carefully, which is in turn why what you're seeing in front of you today looks the way it does. We've been working very well with folks on the City of Kitchener side here, including Ryan and Dan, who are both with us today as well. We've been finding it very productive, and we think what ended up getting landed on here will be a really powerful tool for both research and development on our side of things at the University of Waterloo, but also will provide some really interesting findings for you as the Kitchener City Council in moving forward, however you decide to move forward with participatory budgeting. Now, one of the pieces that I think was really of interest to us in the Smart Regions Initiative here on participatory budgeting is the room for doing actual experimentation in how participatory budgeting is offered. We have looked at over 200 cases of participatory budgets around North America, and we have found remarkably little variation in how participatory budgets are actually run. Now, from the one hand, you could look at that and say, well, that's probably because there is one good way of running participatory budgets, and that's why everyone does this. We think that's not likely the case. We think that what it's because is that this is a fairly new concept, and city councils that have been turned on to the idea around the continent have looked to the 1 or 2 first examples and have just tried to replicate those. This, I think, would be very similar to in your neighborhood on your street, if your neighbor is the first one to get a dog and they got a basset hound, And you thought, I like this Basset Hound. It's a cute dog. He's friendly. Maybe I'll get a Basset Hound too. Then all of your other neighbors get Basset Hounds. And in the end, everyone on the street has a Basset Hound, confusing the fact that everyone has a Basset Hound with Basset Hounds being all the dogs that you could possibly have. And I think the real challenge there is that while a Basset Hound is great for some things, I think they're friendly, I think they're personable, they have a good demeanor. I don't want to take a Basset Hound out with me for my morning jog. It's just not the right dog for that. Maybe I want a Border Collie for that. And if we only have one way of doing participatory budgets, we can't actually see the wide range of approaches we could take, how we could undertake them, and where they're most appropriate. And I think that the way we're starting this here in the City of Kitchener, with 2 different sites where we'll have 2 different designs that we can then compare to each other, helps us to go down the path of actually exploring where some designs will be better than others, and for which purposes different designs are most appropriate. So that's, I think, where I wanted to start us off with at least thinking of where our side, the University of Waterloo, comes in onto this issue and comes into this work. And I think during the conversation, I'm going to be here to provide some answers from our side of things, but the city staff, I'm sure, also will be able to help with their pieces as well.
Okay, thank you very much. There are 2 people in the queue at the moment, starting with Councillor Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, Mr. Groby, I want to extend thanks to the University of Waterloo for their effort to engage with their staff and be a partner as a Institute for Higher Learning. I think that we could have no better partner in trying to develop this format of bettering our democracy at a local level, and this is fantastic. But getting it right is important, and that's where the buy-in is, the enthusiasm is developed. The planning stage will be through the summer, it was my understanding, if this was supported, or the engagement plan, how the engagement process would be, that planning would be through the summer, right?
So my understanding is that we'll be looking at basically late summer and into the fall is where the engagement piece will be.
I appreciate it's very early, but you've referenced that you've looked at participatory budgeting of 200 case studies across and other communities. What were the key aspects of good community buy-in or to develop that enthusiasm? So without going too much, obviously there's work still left to be done, but can you reference a few things that hopefully can excite us?
Sure. So there's a few different things that we've seen between a mix of online and offline engagement, bringing people in the room for in-person assemblies has often been a very effective tool. A lot of what really seems to build a lot of enthusiasm is where ownership of the process feels like it's in the hands of the citizens who are directly involved in it. So that at a very high level is what we tend to see really helps with the engagement process. Now, that is, however, right at the beginning, so very much in a first iteration. It is important for ongoing engagement for there to actually be follow through from the side of the municipal government on actually carrying forward findings that the citizens come up with, the decisions that citizens make, because there's, as I believe this is something that you all would be very familiar with, it can be very dangerous to engage in really enthusiastic engagement with the community and not follow through on your side of the deal. So a lot of things that you would sort of anticipate from fairly standard engagement processes carry through with this as well, but just more so.
So I'm kind of glad that the test case areas that have been proposed through the trial project, I can reference at least from Almsdale Park being in Ward 6, and I have represent other communities that there's no difficulty in engaging the neighborhood. There's instant buy-in and ownership if a good initiative is brought forward or a given opportunity for them to run with it. Whereas in the Chandler Moore neighborhood, there is aspect of a little bit apathy because of being such a transient neighborhood. And there are, sadly, there are significant deficits and needs in that community especially. Mm-hmm. How do you engage a community such as that?
Well, I think this is where we're going to be relying very heavily on the staff from the City of Kitchener to do a lot of the outreach and engagement. A lot of where I see our role is in trying to design how we can approach these two different sites. But we know fully well that there's no such thing as two identical neighborhoods. They're all very, very different, and we can only go so far down that path.
No, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
No two neighborhoods are the same, but you have to be adaptable,
Absolutely.
depending on the community that you're trying to engage with. And you referenced staff are a big component in this, in getting the word out and developing that initial feedback. Where does the members of council play in? I think there's a right role, interjecting in what it needs to be. No, that has to be really what the neighborhood comes forward and as the final design ideas. But in promoting, where does the members of council, where can they involve themselves? What do you see in this process?
I don't know if you wanted to speak to that, Ryan?
Mr. Hagee?
Sure. I would say definitely council could be advocates for the process and the projects, especially the ward councillors that are represent those areas. I would suggest that what we're trying to do here is somewhat akin to building up the vim and vigor that helped have a positive neighborhood strategy. So I've already had discussions with the people that were involved with that to be part of this process. So they would already have input from that, and we would look to council to support in a similar way that they did during the neighborhood strategy.
I'm glad to hear it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Marsh.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gobi, for your presentation. So a couple questions. One is, did you mention that there would be two different designs in the participatory budgeting design for each of the two parks? And can you talk a bit about that?
Sure. So we're still trying to narrow down exactly which elements we are going to run differently between the two sites. And I think part of that is us still working with the city staff to figure out what makes sense to actually vary versus what we should actually just keep lined up with the really an adapted version of the standard consultation process. I will say there is certainly one piece that I know we are going to be varying between the two, which is the structure of the actual decision-making ballot. So to speak to how the projects are selected, once we actually have a list of the projects that people in the community will be voting on, there's a ballot, and there's a lot of different ways you can mark a ballot. You can mark off one thing that you like, you can mark off 5 things that you would like to see, you could rank pieces, and there's been very little variation on how that looks across North America, so we're going to at least be doing 2 different ways that the ballots will be structured.
Sounds good. And so will either of the different pilots or both of them seek to find consensus among the neighborhood voters, or will it just be a majority decision?
So I think I can really break into 2 parts here. So one is the seeking to find consensus. I think a lot of that's going to depend on the time allocation and where we actually structure the timeline of the engagement. So the more time that we have devoted to bringing neighbors together and actually having conversations, the more room there is to actually build that consensus. And ultimately, if a consensus is built amongst all the people who are in a neighborhood around what they should prioritize, in some sense, it doesn't matter that much what the ballot is structured as, because everyone's going to vote the same way anyway. But to the second piece, that's actually one of the elements that we're hoping to really test in the design of the ballots, is do we have voting processes that you described as kind of more majoritarian or pluralistic. So I know we're getting into some of the technical language here, but basically, if in a community you have 40% of the people all agree on the same thing, and then the other 60% are kind of split 3 ways, does the 40% who agree on something determine what 40% of the allocation looks like, or do they determine what 100% of the allocation looks like? And our concern, if it was the 40% determining the 100%, is that you're going to marginalize a lot of people who are likely already marginalized in that community. And so that's one of the things we'll be testing with the two different ballot structures.
Okay, that sounds great. And so I would just ask that between the team and our staff, that we receive updates as a council, not necessarily in person, but that we receive email updates to all of council to hear how things are going, just when there are key milestones met in your process. It's a short time frame you have, and we want to hear how it's going. At least I can speak for myself. I want to hear how it's going, and what the learnings are, and if there are opportunities for council to to observe or to see what's happening in person, that would also be of interest.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Councillor Etherington.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Welcome. Sandhills is in my ward, and I've already heard long and loud about what some residents would like in that park. So one thing I'm unclear on, and perhaps you could clear this up for me. I like the entire concept, but at the same time, I do not want to create a sort of what I call smoke and mirrors illusion that people in a community are going to be totally in charge of spending large amounts of taxpayer cash. Now, I'm not suggesting that that is what is there, but perhaps you could tell me the difference between, from where I sit, the residents there already have a pretty firm grasp of what they want in there. Without this concept, I've always believed that they would have that kind of say on what went into that park. So where's the difference between that and what we're proposing now?
Sure. Thank you very much. So I think part of what this is doing is really opening up the conversation amongst the residents. And one of the things that we'll be testing is how much there is actual consensus on what those residents want. If what we see is that, when we have this idea generation phase, that the residents come up with the sorts of things that they've long been talking about and seem to prioritize it in the way that they've always prioritized it, then in some sense what the process will be is just opening up the black box of how decisions are made so that you can follow and track what ideas are receiving prominence and what aren't. But ultimately, if the residents around Sandhills Park already have a good sense of what they want and there's a pretty strong agreement about it, that's what the decision will ultimately look like.
And if the agreement is not there, to give you an example, what I've encountered recently has been comments on soccer games that take place in that park, which sound fabulous. If some residents wanted to encourage and continue that soccer playing, and some did not, what would you do with that? Where would you go?
Well, I think that's good. A lot of that will really comes down to the bounding of what this project is looking at. From my understanding, where we'll likely be bounding this is really around the what the actual refurbishment pieces will be involved. So how the residents will actually use what is being refurbished is, I think, in some sense, a conversation a bit parallel to what the actual budget allocations would be, but is not quite the same thing. That said, I have no doubt that that'll be a part of a conversation that keeps coming up.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fernandez.
Thanks. So I'm certainly enthused about the partnerships that are happening with the university, because I think that there's many opportunities that we should be doing more of this. So we've chosen a participatory budget format that is pretty detailed and very specific. Will we get to a level of participatory budgeting where we're talking about larger items, larger infrastructure items, or larger projects. This is fairly easy because people are, as Councillor Etherington indicated, they're already very vocal about this. Do you see us going further?
Good question. So the short answer is that's up to you. I see what we're undertaking right now as still fundamentally a pilot. And one of the reasons that we want to experiment with the design pieces is that we think different designs will allow us to do different types of participatory budgets at different scales in different problem areas. Now, what we have right now is something that's very tightly bound around these two parks, but I am hoping, and I'm glad you spoke kindly of building partnerships with the university, I'm hoping that this might be the start of a longer term view of experimenting with participatory budgets to actually explore some of those broader themes.
Yeah, and I think that that's really important because I think with our neighborhood strategy and our Love the Hood, people are already starting to focus on specific small kind of projects that are really community based. But overall, I would hope and believe that residents want to see input. Before budget, what streets are we going to be tearing up, or what sidewalk infills are we going to be doing, those kind of things. You mentioned something about marginalized residents. Can you just elaborate a little bit more on that?
Sure. So when we look at a lot of the research about municipal governance, municipal politics, what we often find is that it tends to be still a relatively small group of residents who have a disproportionate say in how their communities are governed. They, rather unsurprisingly, tend to be higher educated, tend to be higher income, more likely to be property owners. And one of the things that can mean is that if their interests are, I wouldn't say the only ones taken into account, but are disproportionately taken into account, then what that can mean is that the public services that are offered to the other members of the community, many of whom are very important, who we want to make sure are included in our conversations, young people, new Canadians, that if those are ignored or are not quite given the amount of space that we might think in a just good city of Kitchener that they have earned and deserve, that they'll be set aside. And that can further increase their marginalization.
Right. Okay, yeah, I see where you're coming from on that. As you move through this process and you've kind of laid it out in the different steps and recommendations, what happens how will you be able to govern who comes and speaks to you and who participates in the, let's just say the Elmsdale Park issue? Will you be taking down their postal codes or their personal information? Some people may feel uncomfortable with that. How do we get around some of that? Because we want that input, but we also want to make sure that the people who are speaking will benefit the most from this smaller community project.
Absolutely. And so that's one of the things that we're kind of working through some of the logistical details of right now, not just because it matters for how we actually go forward with running the participatory budgeting pilots here, but also because from our side of things, we need to get full approval from the Office of Research Ethics at the university. And these questions of how to fully incorporate and engage with marginalized populations in a productive way are very critical to how we do that here. So I'd say right now it's a bit up in the air, although I wouldn't say that that's not a chaotic up in the air, that's just, it's a piece we're working at developing right now.
Sorry, through the chair, I was going to mention, I'd already alluded to, we're planning on getting the people that were involved with the neighborhood strategy and all the engagement on that. We already have a lot of expertise at the city on how to engage people all over the city. And so we're looking to leverage their expertise for this project.
Okay, one quick question. So this is the beginning steps. Bigger steps. how do you see that? You were happy to hear me encourage the partnerships. Is that something that's going to be coming from you or coming from us in terms of growing this?
So part of what we're looking at for this pilot is in the new year actually reporting back on what our preliminary findings have been, what this engagement has looked like with the city. So we'll have further recommendations at that point. What I would anticipate being amongst the things that could look like would be for following up on this with further experiments. So further sites, maybe different budget amounts, maybe different topics, so not just parks, maybe festivals, maybe infrastructure, some of the pieces there, and doing all those in a bit of a different way. Now, I think that the fact that it starts with that experimental lens means we're more likely to find different use cases to see where we could engage with this. But again, that's later iterations of that. That said, I did want to actually put out that our primary role here is on the design side, and all of the capacity to actually run these participatory budgets is with the City of Kitchener. So we, as much as I'm hoping that this is part of a longer term engagement, we don't want it to be a longer term engagement where as soon as the University of Waterloo is not involved, this stuff stops. Because we think that would be a real failure on both our side and the city's side.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Gazzola?
Yeah, just out of curiosity, is this pro bono work for the university, or?
No, so this project is being funded as part of the Smart Regions Initiative, so there is funding that is coming from the City of Kitchener, and also for this iteration funding from the University of Waterloo as well.
So what's the total cost of this project? Do you have any idea?
So how we are being paid, our research group, is we have receiving $20,000 from the City of Kitchener and $20,000 from our Office of Research at the University of Waterloo to promote the partnership.
Thanks. I'm interested in where you see this sort of thing going. What do we expect to achieve out of this? For example, and I'd like to know your experience from your past experience, where it has gone. Right here, we're looking at $200,000 expenditure and a budget of how many hundreds of millions of dollars. Mm-hmm. So give me some examples of in other places around the world that, how far advanced is this, and what are they doing?
How big can this possibly go?
Yeah, is it going to put me out of work or what?
Probably not. So I will say the places where we have seen the largest share of a municipal budget go towards participatory budgeting have been in Brazil, and even there, the Porto Alegre is where this started in the early 80s. That's still where there's the most robust participatory budgeting process. Even there, it's only 10% of the municipal budget. Now, still a large number, but it's not enough that you have to worry about your job here. In other parts of North America, the largest participatory budgeting rounds we've seen have been $1 million.
Have been what?
$1 million.
But what percentage of that is of the expenditure?
Of the total budgets?
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you exactly, but the $1 million budgets have been in like Chicago and New York, so still pretty small.
It's going to be a small.
Yeah.
How widely used is this in Canada?
Not particularly widely used. So in Ontario, there is Guelph, there's Toronto, there's Hamilton that have done experiments. Elsewhere, there have been a number of experiments, a number of participatory budgeting processes in Montreal. But Montreal is a very different municipal structure, so they've done a lot of it, but very small scales. Victoria has done a fairly large participatory budgeting process too. So
it really is going to be a minor impact.
All depends. I mean, the minor impact won't be to the folks who are around these parks.
You don't see this as taking over 90% of the budgeting we do.
Again, probably not, but this all depends on how these pieces roll out. I think, yeah.
Okay, one quick question. it's been laid out for us what we do now and what participatory budgeting is going to do. If I were to ask you two things, two big differences between what we do now and what we're going to do, what would that be?
So I'd say probably the two biggest pieces would be one, would be that ideas for what are going to be undertaken coming directly from those people who are impacted. I know there's some great engagement processes that the City of Kitchener has, but they don't always have as their starting point the people who are going to be impacted developing them.
But there is a lot of that already. That what happens in our areas has come from our citizens. So I mean that's not really different.
It is. I would say it is in how transparent the process is for how these ideas are developed and kind of move into the pipeline.
All right, what's number two?
And number two, I would say, would be the very transparent way in which the citizens are actually allocating their priorities. The setting of priorities directly from the people who are affected, I think, is absolutely the most unique piece of this.
So we need a lot more transparency, you're saying?
I'd say that this is part of building out increased transparency. It's one of, not the only approach.
Okay, thank you. I may have some questions of staff. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we are taking questions of the delegate and staff at the same time, so you can queue back in, Councillor Gazzola. Councillor Marsh, I had you in the queue for... Go ahead.
Thank you. I want to just add to my comments earlier that I think this is fantastic. I really am excited to see this carried out, and I think that any of the fears or concerns that have been articulated thus far are going to be much allayed by the time we see the results of this first pilot. And I also want to just mention my appreciation for the team, our staff, and the researchers to address all of the concerns that were mentioned during our strategy session that we had earlier. It's great, and I'm very pleased to move this motion at the appropriate time.
Okay, thank you. For those of you that still have questions, we are still in questions, though, so you can come back to comments in a minute. Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Chair Davey. Okay, my question, I'm not sure who can address this, staff or the delegate, but my questions are no disrespect to the university and the good work that you guys do. This is just more reflective of what I feel. So I think you guys do good work. So the concerns I have with this is how are we going to go through the process of representing all the users? Because when I look at a park, to me, I want to see an age-friendly component in this, and I don't see how that's going to be addressed with this when we're going to have the way it's going to be put out.
So through the chair, again, we're going to publicize that we're doing this, and we're asking for input from all concerned parties. So, and like I've mentioned a few times already, we're looking to leverage what we've already learned from the neighborhood strategy and getting input from that group. And I believe general consensus from council is that there was a lot of input from diverse backgrounds into the neighborhood strategy. I expect that we will not get input from every single corner that could be using a park, but we're opening the door that that's a possibility. And we are, again, we can't tell you too many details about exactly what we're going to do because we have not presumed that council is going to approve this in this form here today. So we have not met with the University of Waterloo about exactly what steps we're going to take to engage the various people. That's essentially the next step after this is approved. But we believe that by making it known that this is out there, by going through, for instance, it could be ward councillors, could be neighborhood associations, could be champions in the community, the neighborhood liaison people, the people at community centers. We already have a good network of people to reach out and try to get input from the people that may otherwise not provide input into something like this.
Okay. I still see a gap there, to be honest. And I know when it's led by a staff level, we look at things holistically, where I don't think residents will look at it as a holistically approach. So I think there's a huge gap there.
Councillor Ennis, we are still in questions.
Yeah. When I look at this as well, how are we going to deal with conflicts when we have neighbors? You know, we go through a lot of public input with a lot of projects, and we deal with a lot of conflicts. So how are we going to deal with that when residents are going to be against other residents because they're not happy with what their neighbors picked? How are we going to deal with that?
Through the chair, we're going to have facilitators. So while we're saying that the ideas are coming from residents and the decision making is coming from residents, it's not as if there's a void of staff. So it's not like we throw all the residents in a room and, you know, whoever comes out first is the one who gets their idea. We're looking to have facilitators in those sessions. We do a lot of engagement, so the park planners will be involved with this. They already deal with conflict between residents, different ideas. We'll be engaging our neighborhood group to, again, get their facilitation expertise and abilities. But ultimately, yes, there likely will be differences of opinions on what these parks should look like, and that's the kind of thing that we're interested in hearing from and trying to get residents to choose what is best for the community as a whole, not necessarily themselves. And that's one of the pieces in previous examples, like Hamilton, so where Mr. Kearney was involved directly with that. He has told me a number of times about examples where people would go, they would actually do tours to different projects that were up for grabs, and people were like, oh, we're asking for, you know, a third basketball hoop, and you don't even have a working water fountain. Like, that's a bigger need. I think that should be funded instead of what I want. We're hoping that there will be outcomes along those lines through this process.
Okay, I'll refrain from my comment because I don't want to get in trouble again. With this type of engagement, do you see a reduced workload for staff?
Through the chair, Mr. Ritz has indicated probably not. This could actually, depending on what this looks like moving forward, it could actually cause more workload and different workload from a facilitation point of view. But again, until we get into it and see how it works, we don't know.
Okay, that concerns me there too. Okay, thank you.
Mayor Verbenovich.
Thank you very much, and thank you to both of you for the great work that's been done on this. So to be clear, what we're talking about right now is a pilot. So we're not talking about saying, here's $1 million, go and do something. But we're talking about two small projects, $100,000. And if I understand correctly, the whole principle behind participatory budgeting is actually to increase the level of neighborhood engagement that we would normally have. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And I don't know if this is a question more for Mr. Ritz or Mr. Hagee, you want to take it, but over the last number of years when we've been doing these park enhancements and so on, there's been some dialogue with neighborhood associations and so on, but there has not generally been a comprehensive engagement of citizens in the replacement of these parks. And so this would actually return us to a time period where actually we are engaging with residents at a higher level, consistent with principles of our neighborhood strategy and other initiatives?
Mr. Ritz is nodding yes.
Mr. Ritz is nodding yes, okay. And that for me is extremely helpful. And, just to address the kind of concern that Councillor Ioannidis, I think, was getting at with his questions, if things like accessibility and AODA requirements and so on are part of what needs to be addressed, there won't be an opportunity for residents to say, well, that doesn't matter to us, we're going to ignore those. Like that, if I understand the way this process works, is you'll identify what the sort of must-haves are in terms of achieving the goal, and then the debate will be on the options within those must-haves and then the nice-to-haves, correct?
Correct. So on page 3.3, you'll see the second point is staff vet ideas for reasonability and feasibility. So for instance, if there was a playground to be put in, it would have to meet accessibility requirements, but there might not be a playground that's put in at all. So that's where we get into, what would happen versus what could happen. But yes, there will be elements because of legislation and whatever that the residents will not be able to say, we don't want one of those. Because if it goes in, it needs to be accessible.
And so last but not least, the process will ensure that we engage an appropriate level of individuals. Like sometimes, we get accused around the council horseshoe that the squeaky wheel ends up getting the grease. In other words, one or two people show up, they're loud and vocal, and all of a sudden council's going in that direction. My understanding of participatory budgeting, correct me if I'm wrong, is you will have checks and balances in the process to make sure that we do engage an appropriate level of individuals, and if in fact that isn't happening, then you'll actually go back out and try to engage them again, which isn't necessarily, the way we always do things.
I think that's overall one of the key things that we're trying to get from a participatory budgeting process is increased engagement and increased depth of the engagement from a wider variety of stakeholders than we would often see in a traditional community engagement process.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I have a few people queued in for a second round. I'm just going to ask a couple questions myself first, if I could. Councillor Zoll asked the question about the details of the partnership with the university. I have no doubt that would be greater if it was within staff or private sector. So my question is there a fear, or will it be tracked in terms of the process cost? Because I see $100,000 for a park, and I'm wondering what portion of that is going to be, or if even a portion of that is going to be process versus capital costs of what actually goes into the park.
So through the chair, the $100,000 for each park is the total budget for the project. So any of the process costs would have to come off of that.
Okay, and in this instance, obviously the deal we have with the university would not be part of that then, because that was paid for outside?
Correct, but as we get into advertising, events, if we need translation services, those types of costs that we cannot get for free or sponsored or whatever would have to come out of that budget.
Okay, so I get this is a pilot, and I think it's a good idea. But is there like a control park that we can look at in terms of similar budget, similar area, how that park ended up looking versus this public budget process?
Through the chair, I believe parks would have a general idea as to how much they would need to spend on, just traditional engagement and what we would do and staff time. So we can track what it costs in this case versus that case.
Okay, because again, part of my concern would be like my understanding of how a park works now is we have a professional that covers all angles that he can cover or she can cover in terms of the needs of the area. Now, the way I sort of see this is we're going to have to go through, instead of having the time and energy of one plan, there could be 2 or 3 or 4 plans that then gets put out to the public to vote on, and then there's the time. So I guess there's a cost to this, is my point. So there's a time cost, and there will be an additional process cost compared to how we do things now.
So through the chair, I would suggest in the traditional model, we would get some input from the community and then design a few options and then take that back out to the community and get their ideas about the elements they like in, plan A versus plan B versus plan C. What we're considering in the PB element is go ask people for the different ideas, staff vet it, but do not come up with here's what it could look like or conceptual ideas. We would still need to be able to cost out what those individual elements would be, and then go back to people and say what elements are most important to you, get the vote then, and then once we have a final vote, that's when we would be spending the time on design as opposed to coming up with multiple conceptual designs beforehand. So There's still staff involvement, but like I said before, it just looks a little bit different.
Okay. And my last question, just to be 100% clear, so committee's 100% clear. At the end of the day, the residents will have the final say. Council will not, if for whatever reason the residents come up with a plan that to a number of us we disagree with, that doesn't matter. The residents make the choice. The residents get what they want. At the end of the day, is that the case?
Yes. I would say that's correct. And right now, council doesn't decide what goes into the park or whatever anyway.
Right.
So there's no change in control level. Something this dollar amount council would not say, oh, I think the slide should be over there or any of those types of things.
Okay. Very good. Okay, we now have just a time update on council. We are now almost 15 minutes overdue, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people in the queue. Can you just raise your hand if you have more questions? I don't know who's in here for comment. If you have questions, raise your hand. I know Councillor Gazzola does. Councillor Etherington and Councillor Hernandez. Okay, Councillor Gazzola.
I'm struggling with this and trying to understand where this is going to be better than what we're doing now. So can you ease my concerns as to, because I don't believe in making changes just for the sake of change. So where is it going to be substantially better than what we're doing now? Okay.
Sure. So I would say probably the piece where we would see the greatest substantive difference is in the clarity with which we are able to see what residents' priorities actually look like. I think that the process that we often use to determine that is opaque, and this would really clear that up. And I think that clarity would increase the transparency, it would increase accountability, and it would also lead to residents having a better sense of where their voices are actually translating into action.
Okay, I really question that. And another question I have, what happens when it's all done and things that people expect don't happen? For example, when we talked about this in council, I'm trying to look for some participatory council. When we talked about this in council, the majority of councillors wanted to look at 4 or more different scenarios. But it's come back. We've had no more say. It's come back, and so you're looking at 2. So what's going to happen to the public when we do the same sort of thing?
So through the chair, I would say to the point about 4 versus 2, that's addressed specifically or explicitly in the report as to we've said what the votes were. Here's what we've chosen, and this is why. So it's at the bottom. It's 3-3.
Oh, no, I know. Here's what you've chosen. You said, here's what you've chosen.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, so likewise with what goes forward to citizens and then what gets into the final design, same thing. We're going to have the votes, and we can say, here's the tally of the votes. So, I have young kids. I may want elements that reflect my young kids. But the majority of the park users don't want that. So if there's only 10 people that want a slide and 50 people that want a basketball court, then you can show that 50 people want the basketball court. And yes, there were 10 votes for a slide, but it didn't get in because it wasn't as high a priority. Right now, that would not be reflected in anything that
Did council on this particular instance have any say on what projects we were looking at?
You do today. That's why it's here.
Today, okay. All right, thank you.
Councillor Etherington, you had questions?
Again, through you, Mr. Chair. I just want to quickly ask, in this whole process, will you be involving community police by law? And the reason I ask is, in all parks, certainly in my ward, other areas, you have problems with people wanting to sleep in parks with tents. And you have, in Sandhills, I've handled complaints of needles, drug use, which happens in most parks. So will you be involving community policing by law.
This is a question for you, Mr. May.
Yeah, if I could take a shot at this, Mr. Chair. I think for both of those projects, we're going to need to develop a detailed community engagement plan. And what's really great about these is they are pretty geographically defined, and so they're easier to set. And so, as Mr. Hagees mentioned, community center staff who work every day in these neighborhoods, don't work at City Hall, they work in the neighborhoods and know the people, will help us define that community engagement plan. And so in the park in your ward, I can absolutely see some of our community center staff saying, you know, this person, and this person. 3 very specific names work with us on bylaw and enforcement issues. They need to come to the table as we build the plan. Those will be different individuals in Councillor Singh's ward. And so the point here, I think, is they're going to be very detailed plans based on staff who have relationships in those neighborhoods.
That's good to know, yeah. And by the way, I completely support this concept. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Singh, questions?
Yeah, just quickly, thank you, Mr. Chair. So there's a good, well, the real push is to involve the community. So beyond picking the project and then voting on it, I heard that's a significant component of this, a real aspect of democracy, right? That they can actually work with the project in kind if the neighborhood wants to come together and take part in an initiative. Is there capacity to do that as well, or is it ultimately for design and picking an idea?
So I think this is part of the piece that we kind of need to work out sort of once we get approval, how far we go down. There are certainly participatory budgeting projects where that has happened. In fact, Hamilton, which was alluded to earlier, where my colleague Norman Kearney had worked, they had projects that were proposed that the community then pitched in and worked on in kind when there was only partial funding allocation provided to them.
The reason why I ask this is it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. It could be some components of the design where the community has capacity to do, do something on their own. And the other question is, as you kind of, ultimately design this, what the participatory process is going to be like, would there be an opportunity for those residents, if this is a piece of it, to leverage other funding, like a neighborhood matching grant or something like that? Are we there yet to answer on that, or it's really too early to decide?
Who would speak? Oh, Mr. May.
So I can definitely speak to the neighborhood matching grant. It has a requirement in it that it can't be used in conjunction with other municipal funding. Having said that, perhaps not on the capital side, but on the operating side, once these parks or new public spaces are built, our community center staff and our neighborhood liaisons will have built relationships with the people who have been a part of this process and then can help program it. So it might not be relevant in your ward, but if they decided to put a community center on the Elms, or a community garden on the Elmsdale Park, I know there's one nearby, but if they did, the lasting work we would do is in making sure that that community garden is programmed and used with the community.
Excellent. That's great. Thank you.
And Councillor Ioannidis.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Davey, or Chair Davey. I guess my question is, and it's kind of a little bit of a devil's advocate, and because the reason why I'm raising this, because I know in Hamilton you had some issues, and my concern is, what if this goes horribly wrong? Who's held accountable for this?
Through the chair, it's still a staff process, and so it would be the staff that are facilitating it that are held accountable. So, because my fear is, this project is, let's say it goes something wrong in one of these neighborhoods where it's a park, you're going to have a whole neighborhood that's going to be quite upset, that could be possibly quite upset at the councillor. And again, I don't think that the accountability is at that level, the way we are dealing now, that it's staff. And I'm just concerned about it because I don't know how you guys are going to manage the challenges of this. And I'll leave for my comments.
Okay, I have 3 people in the queue for comments now. I think anyone else is for questions. So if you do have a comment, please click in. Councillor Marsh, you moved it. Would you like to speak last or first? You're first in the queue. Let's go with you then.
Okay, so I just want to make some supporting comments for this recommendation. First of all, this is very much in line with our neighborhood strategy that our council has fully supported wholeheartedly. It's about making sure that our initiatives, where possible, are citizen-led and city-supported. The delegate was asked, well, how is this going to make it better? And I have a couple points to make regarding that. First of all, the input that we currently receive for park improvements is really just limited to the people who happen to show up at the meetings, a single meeting for each park improvement, or potentially two, or from people who take the time to send in their comments. In this case, with these two pilot projects that are really just very minor in the grand scheme of things, we will seek input that is deeper and broader. It will be deeper because we will be involving residents in dialogue between neighbors as well as with the other stakeholders like neighborhood police and bylaw enforcement and and our staff. It will be broader because we will be finding the unusual suspects, people who, like we heard, the children, people who seniors in the neighborhoods who might not have been able to make it out to a community meeting, but will be able to come together by being invited by their neighbors and having a longer process for this dialogue. They will feel heard. I really have a lot of faith in this project, and I really don't think that there's a lot of chance for things to go horribly wrong because we are using this pilot project in a very safe way. We are using it to just enhance an existing process. It's not something wildly new that might spin out of control. We're just enhancing something we already do, and I think it's something that this council should wholeheartedly embrace as we do believe in our neighborhoods.
Thank you. Again, we are way behind time, and Councillor Marsh actually kept it to 2 minutes. I would hope that the rest of council or committee could keep it to that as well, because I now have 6 people in the queue in addition to my own comments. Okay, so again, please keep it brief. Councillor Singh.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try to do so. You know what, the way I look at this is democracy is messy. It's chaotic, but we're not doing this to make it easier for ourselves. We're doing this to bring our residents into the fold of the decision-making process, where they feel that they can set the direction of what their neighborhood, their community, their park should look like, how it should best serve them. And that's important. Far too often we hear criticism from our taxpayers, our residents, of why did City Hall do this, or why was a park designed in a certain way, why was a trail put in here instead of done differently. This is one way of really bringing that decision making, bringing that aspect of feedback back to the community, and allowing them to work amongst themselves to set the direction and have ownership. And you can't say enough of that buy-in. No matter the efforts that we do outside of this to be inclusive, to have community engagement, until we really give the final decision making with a vote. There's nothing better in democracy than a vote. With a vote, there's no better control. And we're doing this through this participatory budget process. I think this is a great initiative. I can't say enough of the benefit that will be achieved, at least in Ward 6 for Elmsdale Park, in a community that is very transient, a community that does sometimes feel that it's left out of the loop. At least going forward, that criticism will be negated because they have an opportunity to be brought into the fold. I'm very supportive, and I want to congratulate to our staff and our partners with the University of Waterloo. Thank you for bringing this forward, and I can only give you well wishes and hope that this will be something that becomes citywide.
Thank you, Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I want to start off by just making one quick comment. When Councillor Ioannidis asked Mr. Hagee if this goes terribly wrong, whose fault will it be? And Mr. Hagee said staff. No, when council makes the decision here today, from going forward from here on, the buck stops here. We make this decision. If it doesn't work out the way we want it to go, that's on us, not on staff. I will support this. I'm skeptical of whether it's better than what we're doing now. If it is, so be it. As long as we can do this sort of thing without incurring a lot of additional costs, and that's the jury is still out on that. So if it's something that will increase public engagement, I can support it. I can see that it's only going to be used, I would think, from time to time, which I thought we already did. I thought staff do a lot of this engagement already. I do feel that sometimes the public feel that they get involved, they say something, and then they never get what they expected. It always goes back to somewhat slanted by what staff bring forward. So hopefully this is an improvement. If it's an improvement, I can support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Verbenovich.
Thank you very much, Chair Davey. As I said earlier, I'm very pleased to see this moving forward today, and I'm hopeful that Council will wholeheartedly support this. And I do want to thank the University of Waterloo. I think we're fortunate to have this level of expertise in our own community looking at this issue of participatory budgeting, something that's being looked at more and more by communities around the world. Several years ago, we engaged in a comprehensive strat plan process, one of the most dynamic processes in the country, and one where Council took the risk and gave custody of the process to our citizen-led Compass Kitchener Citizens Advisory Committee. People were surprised that the Council of the day did that, but we believed in our citizens. And for more than a decade, this process has worked, and it's worked well in terms of its 4-year cycle, the engagement of Compass Kitchener, and the evaluation of how we as a council are doing against our strat plan. We've then moved on and talked about citizen engagement and its importance. We have a plan. We've moved forward with the plan. We've moved forward with Engage Kitchener. And this fall, subject to council adoption, we'll be looking at a formal policy around citizen engagement. In my mind, this is the next logical step, looking at it from a financial point of view, one where we go deeper and broader in our consultation with our citizens, as Councillor Marsh talked about. I believe that this is strongly in line with our neighbourhood strategy. We as a council can't talk about wanting to see more things citizen-led and city-supported and not walk the talk as this pilot project is suggesting. We heard through that neighbourhood strategy consultation, one of our most comprehensive consultations thus far, that one of the major criticisms that we heard was that our process to redevelop parks and playgrounds isn't working, and we don't build parks that respond to unique neighbourhood needs. This pilot gives us a chance to, in fact, start doing that and to start doing a better job of doing that. And so I'm very encouraged by it, will support it, and I would hope Council does, or Committee rather, does as a whole. Thank you. Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Chair Davey. First off, I'm going to support this, but the reality is I'm really concerned about this, and quite frankly, when we were going through our business when we were going through our business items that we wanted to see, and I know I marked this off, and quite frankly, if I knew exactly what it was, because it wasn't described in particular, I would have never supported this. And we probably may not even be having this discussion today about it. So, anyways, I'm still not convinced about the accountability to it. But I recognize that there is the transparency component and the engagement component, but I think that's going to be covered with all the initiatives that we've already done and encompassed. And that's the only reason why I'm going to support it. And again, it's only a few $100,000, but I hope I'm wrong. I hope this turns out to be way better than what it's going to be. can be. And I'm a little bit disappointed as well that this didn't encompass ward equity, because again, I see a common theme. It's always a downtown issue there, and it's always one of those things that gets first looked at. And I know there's one suburb in there, but we also have many other suburbs to look at.
Thank you. Councillor Fernandez?
I think Mr. Gobi?
Gobi.
You can sit down.
Oh,
You've been on the hot
thank
seat
you.
for a while, so. I get an extra 3 seconds? No, I'm only kidding. This is an issue that's been batted around council chambers and at the door. People saying, how can I affect where my tax dollars go? And I actually remember this being discussed in the previous term of council, that participatory budgeting was something that council wanted. So it's not just a recent iteration, it's just that we've taken a little bit of time to get to where we are today. I love that we've got the partnership with the University of Waterloo. We have 3 great academic facilities in this region, and how great is it that we can not only take advantage of it, but use the expertise that's coming out of those. You know what, we're making small steps in the right direction. And I think you've helped staff explore and research those opportunities on how participatory budgeting can be implemented. Yes, maybe some of us thought it would be at a higher level or bigger projects, but you know what? It's okay to take some small steps and to figure out how we're going to get there and how we're going to implement and get people involved in that. Just tongue-in-cheek, Councillor Singh, you've had a couple good wins today. Tongue-in-cheek. I'm sure that the residents in Ward 6 are feeling pretty happy and elated that there's a couple of projects coming in their ward. And I think that what that will do is we'll get people believing that, yes, between our neighborhood strategy and participatory budgeting, we're going to have a say in where our tax dollars are spent. Yes, I know it's not big dollars yet, but $100,000 for many, many people is big dollars and big money. So thank you. Thanks for bringing it to us. Let's hope we can take this to the next level. I believe that we're not going to run amok too badly. I think we're going to steer that ship, that boat, well, let's say a rowboat right now, in the right direction.
Point of personal privilege. Okay. Councillor Etherington.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll fully support this. And I just wanted to say that I will always support any increased community involvement of residents, particularly those from marginalized areas. I've always been disappointed to note the tiny percentage of very overworked individuals who put so much effort into running our neighborhood associations. I think that needs to change, and this might help. I think this process will also help combat the type of voter apathy we see in municipal elections by encouraging people to put it bluntly, get off their butts, get off their couches, and get more involved in their communities. So it will be getting my full support. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Yaneski.
Yeah, thank you. I think this pilot project is a good initiative. It's a good step forward. And in conclusion, I think the involvement of the community residents directly to help out, I think they'll be much appreciated. So let's move on.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Mr. Gobi, for your work on this, and Mr. Haggie as well. I think some of us, including myself, asked some tough questions because it's part of it's because it's our job. But I started this process very much on the fence on the whole participatory budgeting process in general. I continue to have some concerns. In some ways, I see a parallel between this and even referendums in that the more complex the issue, the less apt it is for this sort of process. Having said that, I think the route that we're taking with the parks here is an applicable one. And I do think that it will engage the residents, and I don't actually have much concern about the residents choosing the wrong project at the end of the day. I have faith in that. The only issue that does really concern me, and I really am trusting staff to track this, is assessing the costs of the process. You need to assess the replacement costs of the work with the University of Waterloo. You need to assess the extra costs in planning and planning multiple different projects, because my concern really is that at the end of the day, we may end up with fewer capital items in the park that we might otherwise see if it was just carried out by professional planning staff. So I'd really love to see the numbers on that at the end of the day. Having said that, I'm cautiously optimistic, and I will support as well. A recorded vote has been called. It has been moved by Councillor Councillor Galloway-Seelock. I see you in the queue here.
Sorry, I was just late to ring in. That's my fault. Just quickly, I want to say I'm very supportive. I think for us, it's a pilot. It's new to us. Let's learn with it. Let's see where it takes us, and let's grow it and develop it. Thanks.
Okay, and Councillor Marsh, have you?
Clarification.
Okay, sure.
So when the chair is asking for detailed analysis of how much it all will cost, are you including the idea that there would be community center staff, and are you asking our staff to itemize their hours as well, or just the planning staff's time?
I'm not asking for, I'm not making it's not a formal amendment or anything. I'm just asking staff to be, to make sure that they're tracking the differences between how the process was done in the past and how much actual capital costs go into the park versus this participatory budget. Again, not formalizing that in terms of an amendment. I think it's important it's a pilot. We need a control group, right?
Yep.
So,
okay, thanks.
Okay, recorded vote has been called. And that carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Councillor Gazzola, I have you in the queue.
I'm moving to the next point.
Okay, investment policy. There is
prepared to move it, and I have a few questions.
Been moved by Councillor Gazzola. There is no presentation unlike what it says in the report here. And Councillor Gazzola, go ahead with your questions, sir.
No, I just there are a number of things. In reading this, the eligible pool investment fund, I didn't realize that there are more than one section to it. There's an equity section and because you've never talked about that. You do refer to that in the long-term plan. Are there any limits when we're into short-term dealings with it? And why have you picked 10%? In the long term?
Through the chair, just to be clear, the city can invest in that, but we have not. In my whole time here at the city, we have not invested in, it's called the One Fund, kind of colloquially. We have not invested in it. And when it first came in, it was just one stream. Now they've looked at it, they've diversified. So I think they have 4 or 5 different streams, types of things you can invest in, but we do not hold anything in the One Fund.
But it's a legitimate investment tool, right?
Yes.
Why have we not...
in our meetings with them, we have found that the rates that we can get, because we're a larger municipality, we can get decent rates that are... They can match almost, but rarely beat. Okay. So it's better for smaller municipalities that don't have as much capital as we do.
Okay, that's a legitimate answer. That if you can do better, I'm surprised though that that's the case. I thought that was an organization that covered the whole province.
It is,
and would have had huge amounts of funds.
Possibly. So the pitch that they often make to us is if you give us a good chunk of your money, we'll be able to, and a couple other large municipalities do that, we'll be able to pool up and, have better returns.
Okay. You're asking, and one of the changes is that if institution, when we're dealing with letters of credit, their rating is changed.
Correct.
That you want to be able to go back to them and say, we want a new letter of credit from an institution that meets the requirements. Can we do that? Once they've given us a letter of credit, are we not held to it, or can we say, no, it's dead, we want a new one?
Through the chair, my understanding is that we would be able to, because they no longer meet our investment
So we can legally
criterias.
we can legally do that.
Yes, and typically the letters of credit have a one-year renewal term, so even if we had to wait till the end of that renewal, kind of when it is due, we would be able to say it doesn't qualify.
Yeah. Okay, and on your update number 4, you're changing there, what I take it to go over the $100,000 limit. Is that right?
It could be depending on the size of the credit union.
Yeah, but so I'm not sure I understand the criteria that you're using. What is the 1% of Tier 1 capital? Where does that come into play? Give me an example of it.
So one of the groups that we were approached by was Libro, for example. So they're a credit union, and they said that they're hampered by our limit of $100,000. Tier 1 capital is something that credit unions have to report as part of their financial statements, and it's, as it says in the last paragraph in that section, that it's share capital, retained profits, those types of things. So it's something that we can find easily in the financial statements of credit unions. Just do the math, whatever Tier 1 capital is times 1% is what they would be allowed. So for instance, in the case of Libro, it would be around $2 million is the total number of letters of credit, if this is approved by council, what we could have with Libro.
Okay, that's what I didn't understand. So you're talking about each individual
credit union.
Credit union. I thought you were somehow looking at.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with us. It's wholly to do with the credit union.
Okay, the only one I don't agree with, and maybe you can persuade me, is excluding your primary bank from these considerations. Doesn't that really then say our whole policy it loses a lot of its meaning if you exclude the primary bank?
I guess through the chair, it depends on how you look at the bank balance. If you look at our normal bank balance as not as an investment per se, but that's the money that we need to have to run our operations, that's the position we're taking with this, is that until we reach, in this case, $40 million, we have a checking account, not a savings account. Because if we drop below that, we don't get paid any interest. So once we get beyond that, it's considered an investment. Below that, it is not.
Okay, but you're sort of giving them a leg up because they've come in and said you have to have such and such a balance. You could end up, if you exclude them from your rules and here, you could end up leaving 100% of your money in that bank.
And there are some regional municipalities that do that, where they do have 100% of their investment in their home institution because they're saying it's our bank account, it's not an investment. We're saying anything over $40 million is an investment, and we need to diversify.
Yeah, but is that, if they leave 100% in there, that's not secure money?
Correct, and that's our opinion. That's why we're saying it needs to be spread out beyond that.
So you're not...
we would keep $40 million plus 35% of the...
So but is that the figure we're talking about, $40 million?
Yes, right now under our current
agreement. So right now
agreement.
that $40 million has to vie with all of the others.
So right now we have no position on the bank balance. So we're saying we need to take one. Whether we include it or whether we exclude it, here we're saying up to $40 million is our bank account for day-to-day operations, and anything above that would be considered an investment.
So that's where you want to go. So you want to take $40 million there as a base. So our banker is going to have $40 million plus whatever else we decide to put there.
Correct.
Well, doesn't that give them too much of a leg?
Through the chair, I guess that's for council to decide. We've taken the position that anything, because we don't earn, if our bank balance falls below $40 million, we do not get any interest on it. And we have some pretty large swings that come in because of our payments, we need a base amount in there. So yes, it's you could argue it's somewhat unfair to the banking institution that we go with, but we would need to hold some money with them anyway, and to say that it's all investment, I would suggest.
Councillor Gazol, you're well over your time. If you have many more questions.
I have one more question.
Okay.
You don't have to leave any money with your bank, right? You're going to be below the level that they want for you to get interest, but you don't have to leave any. You can put all whatever surplus cash you have with another institution. So it's not a question that you don't get any interest on it. You could go with another institution. You'd have to be looking at it a little closer, but.
Correct, and day to day we can have $1 million payments, like tens of millions of dollars going out if we're paying progress payments and those types of things, making payroll. So to actively invest or to keep a bank balance at zero is unrealistic.
Well, I don't know if that's unrealistic. It takes a little bit of work.
I would suggest it's unrealistic on a personal level even, let alone a corporate level.
Okay, Councillor Yaneski.
Very interesting questioning and responses, but just to carry on that, it's got my curiosity. How much money have we got invested at $40 million and over?
What are the city's total
of the $40 million
portfolio?
That's the limit. How much do we have above that we've invested? Anything?
Okay, so in total, about beyond the 40, about $200 million.
Sorry, how much?
About $200 million plus the $40 million.
Okay.
For all investments.
And that's considered long-term?
No, that's all investments. Short-term, long-term, everything the city owns is about around $240, $250 million right now.
Okay. So when we collect taxes, I mean, there's 4 installments over the year, March 1st, May 1st, etc.
Correct.
When you get a chunk of money coming in March 1st, how much money do we collect from the residents? Roughly.
In total throughout the year,
I'm just talking to just that one installment, because most people would probably pay quarterly.
So not entirely true. There are people that are on pre-authorized payment plans and what have you. So we do have spikes at installment dates, but we do not get all of our money, all of our tax revenue at those times. So you're looking for
No, I know the people on installments, they pay on a monthly basis, right?
Correct.
Right. But those who don't, they submit their first installment being in March the 1st.
Yes.
And of all the money you get on March the 1st, how much is that roughly?
So Ms. Saunderson actually does our portfolio, so she's feeding me the right answers. We're in the range of about $30 or $40 million for an installment payment, for residential installments.
Oh, okay, so what would you do with that money? Just put it in an investment, or is that just sort of in a floating cash, or what do you do with it?
So we would look at the cash needs as we know them coming up. So if we have some ability to invest it and make a higher return, we could put it in a GIC for 6 months, 3 months, what have you. But we would also look at what we have coming up. So we know that we have payroll costs on a fairly regular basis. As we get into construction season, we have our capital costs. And so we have a cash model that we estimate what kind of cash inflows and outflows we're going to have. We update that as much as we can by talking to engineering, talking to our payroll people, and we will try to make investments the best we can to get a reasonable return, but have enough cash on hand to pay all our bills as they come due.
I almost wasn't going to allow that question because that's about as succinct an answer as you're going to get about what do you do every quarter with the money that comes in, because, well done. Any further questions? Okay, very good. Councillor Singh?
Yeah, just very briefly. So we're collecting on behalf of the region and the school board as well.
Correct.
As we receive it, do we flow through to them, or is it end of year those payments get transferred?
So we collect on their behalf, we hold it for a period of time and remit to them when it's due.
When there is some period of time, are we able to invest that or put in short-term GICs to get some interest on it, or no?
Yeah, so the timing difference between when we get it and when we have to pay it, we would earn a return on it.
We keep that or we transfer that as well?
We do not transfer that.
Okay, good.
Okay, so a question again on the update to the primary bank balance. Now, if we get over 40 million, we collect interest. We collect interest on the 40 million and everything above it during that period of time?
At that point, the whole amount is considered
So
interest.
is that like a daily thing that they pay interest on it?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So we drop below 40, we get nothing, zero.
Correct.
Okay, is that not something, well, I guess the first question I should ask is what would you estimate our average daily balance is in that account?
So there are days of this one. Yeah. Okay. So Ms. Saunderson's informed me that it can fluctuate, but it can go below the 40 million, so it can go down into the 20s, but then it can also be up in the 50, $60 million range. As well.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
It can go below the 40, so it can go down to, say, like $20 million, but it can also be up around the $50 million range.
And sorry, I know these are difficult questions on the fly, but I guess my question then would be, can you give me an idea of how often we're taking advantage of that over $40 million interest rate?
The majority of the year, right? Okay, so the majority of the year we would be above that. It trails off when we, toward the end of the year, we aren't getting tax installments, those types of things, and so.
No, that's fine. That ends my line of questioning on that. The only other question I had is the emerging issues under investing in credit unions. I found it interesting because it seems to indicate that other municipalities are either looking at this or doing this. And the only reason I would guess they would do that is because there's potentially favorable interest rates.
Possibly, yes.
Okay. So, and like I know I trust staff's looked at this and they're taking a conservative position, but being that we're so limited in what our investments can be, I guess my question is there, even in looking at diversification in terms of small amount, the staff still sees this as too much of a risk to even explore?
Our position has been, we believe the legislation has a bit of a hole in it where it's totally silent on anything under 2 years, what quality rating you need to have. And if you read through the reg, it is very prescriptive everywhere else about the quality, the types of things you can invest in, and the quality of those investments. And so it seems strange to us that there is this one section, so if you're investing for under 2 years, it's wild, wild west. There are no requirements as to the quality of it, and that just seems counterintuitive based on the way the rest of the reg is, so we see that as being too risky.
Okay, but legislation aside, you don't see it as a loophole that we should be or could be taking advantage of?
It's something we could. The different credit unions have approached us in the past about it, and their rates are comparable to what we're seeing. Sometimes they can do better than the investments that we have, the people we deal with. Other times they're not. So it's not as if they are considerably better all the time. It's kind of goes sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Okay, we might continue this offline. Councillor Gazzola?
I just want to make a comment when we're ready to vote.
Yeah, and you moved it, and there's no one else in the queue, so go ahead and make your comment, please.
No, I would ask the council. I have no problem with the tweaking that they're doing on the majority of the things. I will not support item number 2, pulling our banker out of the loop, because I think it takes away from our policy. So I would ask that. So I'd like you to vote on each of the 4 separately in a recorded vote.
Okay, so to clarify, you're moving the whole thing, but you want to vote on update number...
I'm moving the whole thing, but I'm indicating that I'm not going to be supporting the item number...
Update number 2.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll take that separately. Everything else I can take as one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yes, fine.
Okay. I don't see anyone else making comment. Just succinctly, I think good work. I'm in support. So we will take update number 2 first. That's on page 4-5.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, there was something I had mentioned earlier to you,
but that's
I
right.
Totally forgot. There is a wording piece that we mentioned in the report but is not reflected in the policy. So it's talking about the primary bank balance, and that from time to time, because we get spikes, it's hard for us to be in compliance. So we've put wording in about needing 30 days to come into compliance if we're deemed non-compliant. So in short, on page 422, down at the bottom, it talks about the minimum primary bank account balance required to obtain a preferred rate is excluded. Corollary, or a second point to that, is compliance with maximum bank balances is required within 30 days of non-compliance. So we would add that wording in. So it's nothing new that was not mentioned in the report. It was just not reflected in the wording in the policy.
Yeah, if I could comment on that, I don't have a problem with that, because in any investment policy like this, unless you're looking at it every hour on the hour, you could go out of compliance.
Correct.
And I think it's generally accepted that when you periodically you get shoved out of compliance, that you have a period of time to correct that. So to me, that's not an issue.
Okay, so with that, again, we will vote on the update number 2 first. I want to see hands. Those in favor? And opposed?
I had asked for a recorded vote.
Oh, pardon me, you did ask for a recorded vote. Again, we'll have to record a vote then on update number 2, please. Okay, voting is open. Okay, those in favor? And opposed? Motion carries. And the balance of the item? Recorded vote. And that carries unanimously. Very good. Okay, up next we have item number 5, the policy review.
Mr. Goldrup is here if there's any questions from committee. Mayor Vervenovic.
Thanks. Not a question, just prepared to move it, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Councillor Fernandez.
I mean, I think really we're just changing a few wording here on this policy. It's not a significant change. This is something we've had in place for quite a while. Is that not correct?
Through the chair, Bill 132 amends the definition of workplace harassment and introduces new requirements of us to have a very active program of support to employees so that they understand how they can make a complaint, and so that we can be much more active in prevention through the change from a human rights policy to a respect in the workplace policy.
Okay, so that was the first section of the policy. That was we're much more clear on how that supports our staff.
Correct.
Okay, that's good. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And no further questions on that. So it's been moved by Mayor Vervenovic. Those in favor? Oh, comments? Sorry.
No, I just want to thank staff for bringing this update forward. I think, if for no other reason, having this policy and all the other policies we're going to be dealing with in the weeks ahead is a good sort of refresher and reminder for all of us about them. And this one in particular, I think, is a good reminder about the importance of this issue and the kind of work environment we want to have at the City of Kitchener.
Okay. So it's been moved by Mayor Vervanovic. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Unanimous, yes. Sorry.
Okay, that was unanimous. Do you want to? Okay, well done.
Okay, that concludes. So we need to have planning. What time then? We can't start early? Staff aren't here and the delegate is not here for the planning items. Sounds good. 5 or 10 minute break, guys.